paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
A massive monster menaces the world. Threatening the most intimate terror a woman ever felt. Because of an experimenter with life. The incredible two-headed transplant.
Who are you? I'm your brother. You and I are now one, dummy.
Get the guns.
Couple was killed up there in the loop last night. A couple of kids claim they saw a giant with two heads to it.
Doc's picked up the scent. Come on, let's go.
No woman is safe from his deadly embrace. No man is safe from his killer lust.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Agatha Luz.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Tim Luz.
Pardon me, I'm just enjoying some Jekyll and Hyde joy juice.
We wrap up Shocktober 2024 as well as one of our 3 Patreon donor months with one from James Brummel, the incredible two-headed transplant. That's not the one with Rosie Greer, nor is it the one from Japan. It's the two-headed movie with Bruce Dern as a mad scientist who combines the body and brain of a man-child who only knows what he reads in the New York Post with the head of a psychotic killer. It's Master Blaster all in one body. We will be spoiling this film as we go ahead, so if you don't want anything ruined for you, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the incredible two-headed transplant. You will not be sorry. So Tim, when was the first time you saw this film and what did you think, sir?
I'll admit, actually, watching it for this was the first time. It's one of those ones, and I will confess, when we were going to do this, I got confused and thought it was the thing with two heads that we were doing. So I was like, oh, it's the other one with Bruce Dern. So I had been curious to see it. I'd seen a lot of clips from like, It Came From Hollywood and read about it in the Golden Turkey Award. So I was curious, and it's an interesting one. There are some cinematic techniques I think are really cool in it, but I'll admit, it didn't really grab me. I think it's kind of slow. I think Bruce Dern seems to be on some kind of
depressant
kind of tranquilizer for most of his role. There's a lot of times I'm like, oh, are they going to go in an interesting direction with this? I'm like, oh, no, not really. It's just sort of doing this. But there are some things I really enjoyed it and found kind of fascinating that we'll get into.
And Agatha, how about yourself?
I'm certain I saw this on MST3K at some point in my decade-long history of watching it. But this was the first time I think I'd paid full attention to the movie as a whole, the whole way through. And I was very interested in some of the editing techniques out of left field for a movie like this. But beyond that, it was a little dry for me. I wanted more humor or more action. There was I felt empty when it was over.
Yeah, the editing techniques really grab you right from the get-go. And don't let go. They really reminded me a lot of Easy Rider with that kind of flashing forward between what you're watching now. And then it's very odd later on when they have flashbacks to a childhood trauma. And I'm just like, wait, are we going forward in time? No, we're going back in time. This was a first time watch for me as well. I have to say that Patreon donor James Bremmel is very into this movie and wrote up a whole lot of stuff for me to talk about. So thank you, James, for doing that, because I would have gone a little bit more surfacey on something like this and just had a good time making fun of it. But instead, we're going to try to, dive a little bit deeper and get into some of the nitty gritty with this stuff, because it is an interesting entry in the two-headed person genre, or even just the brain transplant genre. I mean, of course, the brain that who wouldn't die has some similarities to that, especially with the lab assistant Max in this one, who really wants to have a new body. But it's interesting that he wants to have a new body rather than Bruce Dern. Bruce Dern just seems, as this mad scientist, just seems very content to make two-headed creatures. He just loves making two-headed creatures in his lab, which is part of his suburban home, which is a very odd choice.
He also seems to be pretty easily influenced. Like, Max will constantly be like, we have to keep him alive. He's like, oh, yeah, you're right. And when it comes to the big, the operation itself, Max is the one who's like, we've got 2 perfect specimens. We should do it. We should do this horrible, evil thing. And he's just like, yeah, all right, prep him for surgery. Fine.
But there is something I kind of love about having a mad scientist lab in the basement of a suburban dwelling, because where would you not expect it to be? Right there in the middle of I'm assuming they're more well-to-do given that they have servants. So, I'm not imagining a servant, right?
Well, I mean, you have Danny and his father being kind of the caretakers and gardeners.
Yes,
so there, yeah.
So it's kind of like danger could be anywhere. It's even in the suburbs.
It also brought to mind for me, like, the Delambre family from The Fly, that, you have this beautiful, bucolic, nice house and the wife and kid, and then dad can go downstairs, close this big metal door, lock it, and do all sorts of unseemly, bizarre stuff that ends up with heads where they don't belong.
This also fit in for me with the whole mind transfer thing. There's a great movie called Change of Mind. Well, it's not great. There's a movie called Change of Mind where it is and this, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about The Thing with Two Heads. It's a African-American gentleman who gets the brain of a white person transferred into his head. So then he gets to experience all of the racism. Much more heartfelt and touching than the whole Rosie Greer, Ray Milland thing that we have going on later on. But yeah, this was one I was really not that familiar with. I don't remember it being part of It Came from Hollywood. I believe you that it was. I definitely remembered some of those shots, like Manster, when you see the eye on the shoulder, which reminds me a lot of the Stephen King story where the eyes start showing up on parts of the body that they shouldn't be. And then of course, a lot of clips from The Thing with Two Heads, especially that "Do you have two of anything else?" line. That's one of the best ones that are in there. But yeah, this one really had gone under the radar for me, except I definitely had seen that image of John Bloom as Danny, the man-child character, with, is it Albert Cole? Is it Cass that's on his shoulder? Albert Cole, who just, man, oh man, he loves being evil. He has the best time being evil. And there's so many times where you cut to him and he's just like moving his eyes back and forth and gnashing his teeth. I mean, it's not like a Pruitt Taylor Vince kind of eye motion, but he's just like moving his eyes and looking around and just like, what can I get into next? Because this guy just loves doing evil.
And he's so randomly evil, too. He's just like, I'm just going to run over here and grab a woman because I can. And now I'm going to run in the opposite direction back to my car and drive off. And it's just like this wacky, gleeful murder spree. He just isn't going to pull back from it. And the actor just goes with it. I was impressed by that level of acting, honestly. He just dug into it.
And whenever we get a close up of him, all I can think was like, well, Dwight Fry would look at this and go, maybe you should pull back a little bit.
Right. He kind of reminded me of John Aston a little bit. And, just, I don't know, the shape of his face or something. And he's got that little mustache. I mean, he's not Gomez or anything, but he's getting close. And yeah, we start off with him having murdered a woman's husband and has her hostage. And we get to see the phone is off the wall and you hear the voice on the other end. And you're just like, wow, something bad is going on right now. And then you start those flashes, and we talked about those flash cuts and everything. And we get to see the cops show up. And I just love how he's surrounded by these cops and he's not going to give up his weapon or anything. Well, I think he does eventually drop that huge butcher knife or like cleaver.
He was holding upside down.
Yes. Didn't want to accidentally murder that woman. And then he takes a freaking header out of a window to avoid being captured. But luckily, there's 2 cops right outside.
I gotta say, the coppers, these are like the calmest cops I've ever seen chasing down a serial killer. The 2 guys like, hey, steady, why don't you put that down? And when he jumps out, there's that one walking up with a smile, just like, hi, I got you. Okay. I actually love Cole's reaction in the very quick courtroom scene we have, that he's kind of like got this smirk. And then as soon as the judge says that he's insane and going to a mental hospital, he freaks out like he's insulted by this idea that he is not competent.
I love it. He will stay there until his sanity has been restored. We get to quickly meet the man-child who I mentioned before, and it kept confusing me because his name is John Bloom. I kept thinking of Joe Bob Briggs, but no, very different person. Danny and I guess it's his caretaker, or is it his dad, this Cass guy?
I think it's his dad. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be his dad, because that's what the sheriff says at one point.
Yeah, which really starts to set up this whole father relationship that we have, and that we'll talk about as we go along. But yeah, it's interesting, too, that Cass is played by Albert Cole, and I found a nice article about him where he was actually a horror host, and so it's kind of interesting seeing him show up in this. And then it's actually his son who plays the young version of Danny when we see that flash back as opposed to a flash forward or flash cut that we get. So that was kind of a nice thing, too, that he's not only playing the father of Danny, but then his real-life physical son is playing that younger version of Danny.
Oh, see, I thought it was the guy who plays Danny's father who was the horror host.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Albert Cole, right?
No, Larry Vincent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Larry Vincent is Andrew. My bad. I'm sorry. I was mixing up the killer and the guy. I'm so sorry.
I have to have like a list of the names most of the time to be able to keep them straight.
Yeah, well, it is Cole. It is. So I guess it's the killer's son. Yeah, because this Leslie Cole is young Danny. So the killer's son was. Oh, interesting. Okay. I did not catch that. All of these very exotic names like Ken and Danny and Linda. It's tough for me to keep them straight.
In terms of Leslie playing the young Danny, I'm not sure if it was just a case of he was just on set and they're like, hey, he looks enough like Bloom, let's get him in here and play the part, or if that was some kind of weird kind of subconscious idea they had about this future association he's going to have with this killer.
I imagine he was just on set. But.
Yes.
But he looks enough like Bloom, and I gotta say, looking at Bloom whenever he's walking around, my God, that guy is just huge. I started to wonder if they were padding up his shoulders because his shoulders have this weird roundness to them, but he's tall enough that I'm not sure. Maybe that's just how he was built, but...
I would imagine, I have no evidence for this, but I would imagine they built up the shoulders a little bit so that it wouldn't be so obvious that the other actor was on his shoulder.
And I hadn't realized I had seen him before in a few things. We saw Dracula versus Frankenstein, and that he was in Star Trek VI. He's the first alien that kind of accosts Kirk and McCoy when they're on the penal colony. Wants like their obedience to the Brotherhood, and then Iman shows up and helps them. And he's the creepy chef from The Great Outdoors when John Candy's doing the old 96er.
Oh, God.
The big guy doing the big smile thing. Yeah.
That's like the only part of that movie I remember is him trying to stuff down that steak, and then he's got all the gristle and stuff. It's like, no, you got to finish it all. I was like, oh, God.
I also saw him credited for Harry and the Hendersons as Feet, and I'm like, was he like Kevin Peter Hall's foot double or something?
Right.
Or is there a character named Feet that I couldn't remember? I could not find out, but I was really curious because I love that movie.
Yeah, he is huge, and I think he actually gives a really good performance here, especially when it comes to after he gets the surgery and he's got Cass on his shoulder, and you can see the hesitancy when he's going after the Pat Priest character at one point, and you see this look on his face like, no, I don't want to do this, even though he's reaching out his arms and going for her. And I just love that whole, like, he's not strong enough mentally to fend off Cass and his power over him.
The first time he sees her after the operation when she is in the lab, and he has this smile like, oh, it's a friendly face. Oh, help me. And then you see that Cass is just like, yes, I'm going to have this woman. Seeing those two contrasting smiles is really creepy. That was actually a really great moment.
Yeah, there are some really good things in here. I love Casey Kasem when he shows up. I always love seeing Casey Kasem. I love that they were smart enough to use him as radio voice for all of the police updates, which was good. Kind of throws on a little bit different of a voice. It's not the top 40 Casey Kasem. It's the much more serious version. The one who gets the goddamn death dedications. That's the one that is coming to play when it comes to the updates from the cops.
That's the thing I was waiting for, take me out of an upbeat tempo for a dedication to a dead monkey. It's like, I cannot think of Casey Kasem and not think of that audio clip. I did notice that when he gets dramatic in this, he whispers.
Yes.
There's we've got to destroy it, Roger. It's like when he first shows up again after, a month in, it's like he's on vacation. I'm like, did Casey have laryngitis when he filmed this scene? Because his voice is very gravelly for just one scene. I do wonder, though, I don't know what is with the Ken character does not seem to like Danny. Like there's that scene when Danny and Andrew are pulling the stump out and he's watching with this kind of skeptical, I don't know how I feel about this. And then they cut back to Danny looking at him like, Urgh. And that makes sense because, Danny has a crush on Linda and he probably instinctually knows this guy kind of has a thing for Linda too. But I don't know what it is about Ken looking at him looking like, I don't like this for whatever reason.
Ken would be a much better partner to Linda than Roger is because, like I said, Bruce Dern is just obsessed with creating two-headed creatures. And that's really the crux of this movie is this whole domestic relationship between Roger and Linda, between Bruce Dern and Pat Priest, and that he is ignoring her and he is putting all of his work before the relationship with her. And we've got this whole thing of her waiting for him for dinner and, the lab's right downstairs or whatever, but like she's waiting for him. She's not allowed to bother him, I guess. And she just gets stood up for dinner in the same house. And I'm like, come on. But yeah, meanwhile, Ken, Casey Kasem, he's, you got to help him out and all these, like really trying to placate and get those relationships fixed, even though, yeah, you can definitely tell he's got a crush on Linda. And who wouldn't? Because Pat Priest, she is not shy about showing herself in this movie. There's so many times where it's just like bikini briefs, like coming out of the bath, all these things. I'm like, wow, okay, they really were playing up. She's away from the confines of being Marilyn on the Munsters, and now she can do whatever the hell she wants in these movies.
I also feel like they were serving a very particular fan base where it's like, okay, let's tie her up. Let's throw her in a cage. Let's tie her up again.
Oh, God, yes.
Like, you can really feel the exploitation roots of that movie in any scene with her being tied up or locked away somewhere or gagged. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
It felt like an Irving Klaw film. Yeah.
Ken definitely has a thing for Linda and would be a better partner. But you see, even Danny is kind of is better in that he's attentive. Like when she's gardening, he comes over, he wants to help out. When everything goes wrong, he's coming back with a big thing of flowers to give to her. He's thoughtful in the way that Roger is absolutely not.
100%. Yeah, he's really kind of a shit.
Yes.
He really is.
And yeah, we should talk about Max, it's very interesting. Barry Kroger as Max, he's shown so many times before he gets a name. And I'm just like, who the hell is this guy? And the way that they do these flash cuts, they were like cutting to him. I'm like, who is this guy? Where's he at even? And then finally I'm like, oh, he's in the lab. And then you see him with these gloves on. He starts to talk about his hands and that he really wants these new hands. And it's just like we've seen in a lot of these types of movies, this whole like, well, my old body, my current body is starting to, wear down, or I've got issues and I really need a new body to do this. And I don't know how good Danny would be at like surgery stuff with those big fucking paws he's got. But, it would definitely give Max a few more years, let's say.
Yeah, he also reminded me, he's like the sinister version of the really cute hunchback assistant from House of Dracula, who's like helping out and just waiting for the research to get there so she can be cured, except she's really sweet and nice, and this guy is just sinister and evil as hell, right down to the gloves. I kept thinking of like Rotwang from Metropolis or Dr. Strangelove for a while there. When it comes to mad science, if you have a glove on, you're not a good person. You're somebody to be careful of. And I almost felt like I wish we had gotten a movie where it was his head on Danny, because he is kind of the villain of the movie for me. he's the real motivator for like, we got perfectly good dying homicidal maniac. We've got, a developmentally disabled guy who nobody's going to miss. We could do this. And he's constantly like, no, we shouldn't kill him. We should keep him alive. Yeah, maybe that would be a good idea. And Roger just seems to be on board, which made me wonder, was Max like maybe his mentor at some point? Not just an assistant, but like this really, important colleague. Maybe he could have done this stuff if his hands were working.
Which actually brings up something really interesting, and I'd love to dig more into, but I'm coming up against a brick wall. So I'm hoping maybe one of you will have more to go with it. But the relationships between Roger and Max set up against the relationship of Roger and Linda is really interesting because he seems to care so much more about what Max thinks, and he doesn't care what Linda thinks. Linda's just an extra being in the house. So they're married, so there has to be a stronger relationship there than with his lab partner, basically. But I was wondering if either of you had anything to say about
I did notice
those two up against each other.
I did notice a couple key moments where we see Max, when Linda comes up or Linda's in the scene and he's just doing that kind of scowl of just like, no, I don't want her around, which brought to mind like Reanimator and Jeffrey Combs, like, oh, there's a woman involved. I'll never be able to get my experiments done if Barbara Crampton's around, get her out of the room. So I almost feel like it's, he's jealous just because he wants the time to do these experiments and she's a distraction in his eyes. But I really like to know what the hospital breakdown thing is that happened to Roger, and does it involve Max? Because we have this, thing about he had a breakdown, he wasn't allowed back at the hospital, and he's really bitter about that. And since Max is here, I'm like, was it something involving these two guys? Did he go to bat for him or something? Did something weird happen? I don't know. But I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I can totally see Max being a mentor to him at some point, and teaching him these techniques that were maybe, not approved by the board, not approved by the medical community, and that's what eventually gets Roger kicked out, or maybe even got Max kicked out originally, and then Roger soon follows. It is interesting just how many father-son relationships there are in here, both real father-sons as far as, Danny and his father, and then you have this kind of paternal relationship between Max and Roger. And then this whole thing of like, when Danny wakes up, what does Cole say to him? Oh, I'm your brother. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And he's kind of like the new creature with the two heads is almost the son of Roger and Max, rather than being a natural son. We can talk about Frankenstein as well, rather than being that natural son that Victor Frankenstein and Elizabeth, right? Like they should have had together. Instead, he's making his own son with, Igor in the lab or whatever. And he's just like, oh, yeah, I'm creating life here rather than creating life with my partner who I should be having this. But instead, I'm way too interested in like, oh, I'll put another head on here and then I'll swap that one out. And now I've got a new body. Hey, this is great.
It's funny you bring that up because I started noticing a lot of parallels with Frankenstein, specifically the Universal Monster ones that, like you said, you have Elizabeth and those who's like the ignored fiance, and you have Linda here, the ignored wife. And then you have Max, who seems to be a fusion of both Fritz, the lab assistant, but also Dr. Pretorius, the one who's
Dr. Pretorius, especially the gayness of Dr. Pretorius.
Absolutely. Yeah. And leading him down this terrible path. You've got the lynch mob. You've got Ken, who's sort of like a Victor Moritz character from the original one, the one who's going to show up and, at least it's assumed in the first movie, take care of Elizabeth once Henry's out of the way. And Ken's also sort of the Dr. Waldman character, the Edward Van Sloan, other doctor who's a colleague who's more rational, is like, you've got to stop this stuff. Lots of weird little parallels like that.
Well, and then, of course, the end, which we'll get to eventually. But yeah, that end is so Frankenstein. I think I even wrote that on my notes with this whole, and it's more Bride of Frankenstein. It's almost We Belong Dead. And like literally, we belong dead when it comes to that.
And yet I kept thinking, is Danny going to have a moment where he finally asserts control and stops him or saves Linda? But he doesn't. He doesn't at all.
No, Danny has the worst story. I feel so bad for this character. What happens before the movie starts, of course, how he loses oxygen to his brain and he isn't the same person, but he's still attracted to this place of trauma, which, by the way, it's a cave system, so it It's the womb.
I was also thinking sort of the dark subconscious too. So it's got multiple
but he's
metaphorical
still,
ideas.
He's deeply attracted to this cave system because it was a place of trauma and still is a place of trauma. Then he has this horrific surgery happen to him. He's subjected to seeing his own body commit murders and rapes and assaults, and then he dies where he would have died if they'd left him in the cave system years ago. So he is the worst, most tragic story of this whole movie. I feel for him so much.
And that last shot where we see he's conscious as the cave is happening all around him is just, it's awful. Yeah. I also noticed sort of a parallel between Danny Manny, as I kind of call him, and Roger and Max. That, I mean, you have, in Roger and Max's case, Max is like this malign influence is kind of like, we should do this. And Roger doesn't seem to have the stones to be like, no, I'm not doing that. He's immediately like, yeah, you're right. We'll do this. He's powerless to stop him. And the same way, Manny is doing this horrible stuff, and Danny is completely powerless to actually put a stop to any of it. Okay,
so you kind of just cracked it open that there are two-headed monsters.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Max might as well be that, he's the devil on the shoulder, just like how Manny's that, or Cass is that devil on Danny's shoulder. Yeah, I love that. I think that's fantastic.
And how many times visually Max and Roger are just paired together, whether they're, with their guns hunting in the mountains or in the lab, they're always in so many scenes together.
There's definitely a lot more than just like, this, cheap exploitation film. And it is cheap, and there's great like gore effects and things like that. As soon as the movie starts, I was like, oh, I'm in for something here. And then the score, oh my God, the score drives me freaking crazy because it is all over the place. And some of the jazz flute that they have going on during these scenes, I'm just like, what is happening here? I kind of love it and I kind of hate it at the same time.
The weird light cymbal taps for suspense when Manny is sneaking into the house, things like that. Or there's one succession of notes that keeps reminding me of the Ifukube score from Godzilla, that bum, 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 after Godzilla's Rampage that we hear a couple times too. I will say the music when he wakes up in the lab for the first time is actually creepy. I actually thought that was a really good little piece of music. There are points where I'm like, is this diegetic music? Is this like on the radio in the car? Or is this supposed to be score? I can't quite tell.
I mean, it sounds like when they come to the bikers after Danny, the two-headed Danny escapes, thanks to his friend on his shoulder there. And they go out and they find these bikers. I mean, first they find the smoochers. They find all the people that are out there and on Lover's Lane. And the reaction from the one couple that isn't being killed is just kind of like, what's going on over there? That's interesting.
That's kind of weird, yeah.
Somebody should look into that sometime. And talk about ineffective. I mean, they're pretty ineffective. The bikers can't do anything against the two-headed creature. And the cops are the most ineffective cops I've seen in a long darn time.
Mm-hmm.
Right down to the deputy having that voice, hey, sheriff.
Oh my God. I mean, is that ADR? Because it sounds like later on in the movie, it's his real voice. But those first few times he's on screen, the guys on Riff Tracks described it as sounding like a cartoon bear. I was like, yeah, I can definitely hear that.
Yeah, and then in the last scene, we were hearing the actor's voice, and he's doing that voice. So I don't know if he just gave it a little extra juice in looping or what. Because the sheriff in that first scene where we first meet them too, his voice sounds a little crazy too. Yeah. I suddenly thought of the two idiot patrolmen from Last House on the Left who are there for like comic relief for The Town That Dreaded Sundown, where the cops are just completely useless and hilarious in that. Yeah.
I mean, they almost always are in these films. It's very rare that you find competent police force, especially when there's a monster who's, terrorizing the countryside.
Or as they point out on Riff Tracks, the sheriff meets this doctor out of nowhere who, you point out, has something important to tell him, but never actually does tell him. And he immediately is like, come along on the murder investigation.
Yeah, you could be of use. You're a doctor. That means you can do forensics, right? Of course.
Which amounted to, she's dead. She's been beaten up a lot of bones broken. Good job.
But why did you stop by? What did you want to tell me?
Or then there's this cave-in, and nobody seems to be concerned about, well, should we try to excavate and get them out of there the way we did Danny back in the day? Maybe some of them could still be alive, but no, just walk away. Good police work.
Just put a plaque on it.
Oh, and by the way,
Danny did it.
Danny did it all. Great. Good job, Ken. Nice. You could have just said it was Cass. They know he's around, but no.
I mean, if they were
just throw it on the guy, the poor guy.
I mean, blame it on the doctor even.
Yeah.
But just if you're a little worried about Cass being just a head in there, blame it on the doctor.
Exactly.
I mean, you better count as lucky stars that they're not doing that excavation and not finding like an extra skull in there.
But after everything happened to Danny, laying it all at his feet is just like one more, injury and one more insult after injury. It's like
His innocence lost in that cave.
I know. to protect this insane scientist. Like, why?
I was really surprised that The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant actually makes it into Bruce Dern's autobiography.
It did.
And which was wild. And he's just like, yeah, they called me up and said, do you want to make $1,750 for working on this? And that's $1,750, not 17.50. Though it feels like that much effort went into this performance because, I just can't believe I've never seen Bruce Dern as sedate as he is in this role. Never. Like, no matter what.
It's amazing. What's your next step?
Is to take the live head of an animal and replace it completely with the other live animal's head.
And after that?
Then humans. When I am successful with this operation, then I'll be able to do it.
I honestly thought he'd been very poorly ADR'd the whole time. It was just so mumbly. He was talking like this the whole time. No matter what emotion he should have been having, it was just like he was clouded with barbiturates.
Coming into this, I'm thinking like, Dern in Silent Running and Black Sunday, that we're going to get a really unhinged Dern is mad scientist. And he starts off sedate. I'm like, okay, he's starting us quiet, but we're going to ramp it up. And no, we really don't. He gets a little upset when talking about the hospital. He gets really upset when Ken's on the phone and he doesn't want to go answer it. But otherwise, it's like when they're hunting Danny, he's like, yeah, we'll go back out a little bit and try and find him. Just like he's so tuned out. I expected we were going to see him like injecting himself with tranquilizers at some point or something to explain it. That
phone call that he gets so angry at, I'm just like, what was the direction in this moment? Anthony Lanza, what were you doing? Why was he so angry at this? Yeah. And yeah, I was surprised that he wasn't even doing experiments on himself or something, like you said, like shooting tranquilizers or doing some sort of like chemical experiments on himself to be like, oh, well, I can be a better person because of X, Y, and Z. Like the science has opened up all these new avenues for me. But no, it's just the two-headedness of everything. And he's so inspired by that two-headed snake and just keeps going back to that. Okay. Yeah. I guess that's the whole symbol for the film.
Also, he's willing to turn a shotgun on his best friend very casually. Just like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. I'm going to throw my wife in a cage. Again, very casually.
When Cass takes that extension cord or the cord from the phone or whatever, and just like turns her around and starts to like, okay, spread your legs. I'm just like, all right, this feels like a scene to me. This feels like you guys had a contract signed before you started to play together.
Yeah, that was kind of uncomfortable. I couldn't help but notice he pulls out the power cord that's lighting up that painting. And a couple scenes later, this painting is lit up again. So I just imagine Roger like, well, got to get this going again. He's like, that's where his priorities are. He's got to have that painting lit again and looking perfect. And I almost feel like you could have done something with that. The idea that Roger is so depraved that he's very sedate about all this and nothing affects him, but it doesn't feel consistent enough to work.
I think other movies would have shown him either be that cold all the way through about everything, but like chilly instead of kind of like bored almost. Or they could have shown us that he has an addiction problem, or they could have gone even further out and said hypnotism. They could have done something to explain why the character is so one note.
We're wondering that if Max has him hypnotized or something, and that's why every time he's like, we should do this, he's like,
yes,
yeah, we should do that. One little touch that Dern did, and I'm not sure if it was on purpose or what it means, is there's a great moment when Danny comes in after the murders and finds his dad and starts cradling the body, and you can see Dern just kind of roll his eyes like, oh, shit. And it's like, I wasn't sure if to take it of, oh, I really didn't want Danny to see his murdered father's body, of, oh shit, now he's going to be caught up with that. I'll never get untied and be able to get after this guy. Either way, it's kind of a nice touch on Dern's part, though.
I almost wonder if he and Casey Kasem should have exchanged roles, and it should have been like the Casey Kasem vehicle where he's the mad scientist and Bruce Dern's the friend, because Casey Kasem barely has anything to do in this movie. He just kind of shows up or like gives him a call. Hey, don't forget, I'm coming over. And then he shows up later on. Hey, remember, I said I'd be over. There's no real reason for any of that stuff to happen.
They could literally just switch lines, keep their delivery the same, and I think it would be an infinitely better film. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
Although then we might not get Casey Kasem's amazing ensembles because he'd be in a lab coat all the time. Those giant collar shirts and that weird funky tie he has. He's looking stylish.
I love how easily Cass breaks out of the mental asylum. Kind of reminded me a lot of Michael Myers, just like, okay, he's gone. Don't worry about it. He chokes out the one guy, jumps into the car, happens to have a whole bottle of milk there. So that was very convenient. Who's leaving milk in their hot car?
I don't know. Oh, I do have to mention that scene has one of my favorite cuts in the movie too, because it cuts straight from Roger and Linda starting to make love, and he's kind of on top, and we immediately cut to a shot of Cass strangling the guy, and it's like, yes, this is sex for him, is violence. This is what turns him on, is strangling people. And I thought the way those two cut together is really, really cool. I thought that was a really great transition.
I do actually want to look further into the editor's career because
it's the director.
The director did this. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I love it. I think there's a use for this editing style outside of this story because this particular story needed a lot more work to be able to live up to that editing.
I think he was primarily an editor because he has a much bigger editing career than he does as a director, both before and after. So this might have been kind of him trying out directing. I think he had directed one other film before this possibly, but...
Yeah, I want to say it was The Glory Stompers because I did read an interview with him and he was just like, yeah, I helped out this person. Yeah, it does definitely seem like he was much more behind the scenes than actively directing for quite a bit of his career.
And I'm not saying he was a bad director outside of the cuts, not at all, but those were stellar.
Oh, yeah.
Another one I love is when they're talking about the monkey and taking the experiment to the next phase of, cutting off the head and seeing if the other one will take it and take control of the body. And we cut from Max staring at the monkey with this sinister smile right to Andrew with the clippers clipping the hedge like chop, chop, chop. Mm-hmm. Beautiful cut. I love that. I love the idea these cuts are kind of letting us in on the mindsets of these characters.
Even just those little things like Danny with his axe and he's running along the bushes and stuff. And it's just like, hey, Danny, it's not a toy. It's just showing like how carefree he is. And then it's just awful. Like, again, to your point, Agatha, just what a raw deal this poor guy's had. Like, he seems to be doing pretty okay with his life when we first meet him and able to use his enormous strength to rip out a tree from the ground that has absolutely no roots or root system. But yeah, it's just amazing to see him. And it seems like him and his dad are getting along pretty well. And just, his dad's watching out for him. And then, he gets everything taken away from him. Everything.
And I love the little edit cuts of Andrew, his father, during the operation scene, like little, almost subliminal, and always, cutting from Roger to that. Like, this is on Roger's mind of like, I promised I'd look after him, and this is how I'm going to do it, apparently.
Yeah, he edited some interesting things, Anthony Lanza, in this film. Of course, the previous one was Dinah East, which I feel like we've talked about on the show before. It was the kind of odd Jean Nash film that was allegedly about Mae West, that there were all these rumors that she was actually a man. And so when this star dies and Dinah East, and they go, Mae West, Dinah East, and they go in and they take pictures of the body and they find out, oh, she was a man all along. It was absolutely bizarre exploitation film. It was kind of hard to find for a while, but fortunately, it's a little bit easier these days.
Good, because I want to find it. I want to see this.
I think you'll have a good time.
Excellent.
I did notice some titles in this filmography, like Outlaw Motorcycles and Hot Rod Action, that feel like the kind of exploitation movies that the style would lend well to what we see here, like The Biker Fight, for example.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the biker fight is actually okay.
He does a very good job of cutting it in such a way where he's trying to hide the fake head during the fight scene. Like, there's a moment where they're kind of circling each other, and it's just at that moment that the biker kind of blocks what we would have seen of the fake head. And I thought that was, again, a really clever way of not letting us see it too much. There's some scenes where the fake head doesn't look bad. Some scenes where it bounces around a lot, like when he's chasing after the woman in the lake, where it looks a little goofy, or even the walking scenes where you can tell it's like Cole like perched on his shoulder, moving with Bloom as they're walking, but it actually kind of works. They actually do a pretty good job with that.
And when they show the actual actor on the shoulder, I think those shots are just fantastic. And it helps that Bloom is just built like such a brick shithouse that to fit this little actor on his shoulder works pretty darn well.
Also, maybe I'm just kind of imagining it, but I swear as the film went on, they started to make up Cole a little bit to look a little gray and ashen, almost like his body is rejecting the transplant. It's very subtle, but you can especially see on the fake head that in some wide shots, his head looks almost gray, which I thought if that was on purpose, that's really subtle and interesting.
I'd like to think it was on purpose, but I don't imagine it was. And then, like we were saying earlier, we come to the end of this film and literally have the mob going after poor Danny with his two heads. And yeah, that idea of I'm going to go back to this cave, back to the womb and pull the walls down behind me. And yeah, it's awful. It is so bad that the poor guy goes, but at least he takes everyone bad with him. Well, most bad people.
Yeah, every time they showed like the posse out with the hounds and then cut to Danny running across like the countryside, all I could think was Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. And it made me wonder, maybe this posse would have got after Danny eventually anyway, just because he's different, you know?
Yeah, it is remarkable that they don't really bring that up too much. And just like some of the language around him, they're not calling him simple or any of these words that you would associate with him, or like, it kind of reminded me of the son from Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, who's just like pure muscle and no hate, you know, like he seems pretty just stupid and big. And that's so much of Danny's MO. But yeah, I like this guy and I really pull for him. And then it's just awful. All of these bad things. I don't know if it's Bloom and his ability to act. I don't know if it's just the way that they characterize this character, but it all comes together for me with Danny and just making me feel bad for the character, which I feel a lot worse for him than I do pretty much any of these other two-headed characters that we're going to talk about in the next segment.
The scene where he goes back to the mine the first time and we just see that sort of that curiosity, but also fear and trauma and kind of remembering how he was as a kid and he still kind of is now. That the way that plays on Bloom's face, I think is actually really good. I thought that was a great scene.
Well, the audio is very effective there too. Hearing those echoes and hearing the flashback audio and things, just like bringing up those memories, hearing people calling his name. I was like, oh yeah, that's really good.
And him playing with like a toy gun outside the mine. And you can imagine playing like cops and robbers. And the bad guys, of course, are going to hide in there and I'm going to go get him. And that's exactly what he ends up doing with Danny, that he actually leads him to this place to be their hiding place. Almost like, yes, this is where evil belongs. It belongs in this dark, nasty cave where this terrible thing happened to me.
I kept waiting for Roman to come marching out of there.
Oh, Roman. Fool humans. I got to give credit to a few things. There's an amazing shot when he's going after the two teenagers in the cars where he's coming out of the swamp silhouetted and you just see like the car in the foreground and him kind of lurching out of the swamp with an arm out that I thought was actually really effective too. That was a creepy shot. It also creeped me out a little bit that the girl in the second car is screaming no, you know, trying to get away from the boyfriend. And the couple in the front car is just like, whatever.
Well, there's also the fact that she's being assaulted and trying to leave. He brings her back in the car and Danny, Manny Monster come up and the would-be rapist is now clinging to his would-be victim just out of terror. It was just an interesting moment, but it still left me kind of like, oh, what's going to happen now? Like, that's the end of their lives here. She was almost raped. She was definitely assaulted, and now she is murdered. This is terrible. And right there behind them is a car with a couple making out.
Yeah. I also have to bring up the very ominous thing when Linda's asking Roger, is there anything you could do for Danny? And he's like, maybe after the next experiment. I'm like, what was Roger gonna do to help, in heavy quotation marks, Danny? He does transplants. What would he do in this situation?
And when Linda asks if they can go away on vacation, you can understand they've been through a lot of stress. Something happened at the hospital. Now some weird stuff is happening at their house. And he asks Linda, well, what do you want me to do about my work? It's like, I don't know, maybe don't do creepy work.
Maybe let Max take care of the monkeys and bunnies for a couple of days, you know?
You have an assistant who can manage.
He's much more attentive to this kind of thing. I also have to bring up the amazing cut of when they're talking about, I'll go to the sheriff eventually. I'm going to send Max into town. He'll take care of Andrew's funeral. Cut immediately to Max just digging a hole in the backyard to dump the two bodies. And it's like, oh, God, again, this poor family.
Yeah, and you're just like, well, what's their whole story? Like, why is it just the father and the son? Like, what happened to the mom? Like, yeah, you're like, okay, well, this is a damaged group as well. Pretty much everybody in here is damaged.
Again, that quote from Danny's father of like, I appreciate you looking out for my boy. It's like, so what was he expecting of Roger and Linda in terms of looking out? Because he's still there and taking care of his son. So I'm kind of curious as to what he was expecting there.
Yeah, I mentioned that this was a request from James Brummel, and one of his notes that he gave to me was the idea of the petting the two-headed snake, which Dory keeps going back to.
Yeah, I'll admit.
Notice Max doing that a lot.
Especially while Roger's making up his mind about the operation. It does seem kind of suggestive, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that line from from The Thing with Two Heads. Do you have two of anything else? I don't know why you would. That seems like a very odd surgery to do, but
it's an odd situation. So
yeah.
I wonder if part of it was also practical because it's the only animal that actually does have two heads. And if you start petting the bunny or the monkey, the prosthetic one might come off. I will say the fake monkey head looked good to the point where I was a little worried. Was that like a taxidermied monkey head that they put on that monkey? I hope not, but ugh.
Well, the very first shot of the monkey, it almost looked like the other head was hiding, that there was a second monkey that was actually there. But then, yeah, that was the only time I thought, are there actually two monkeys here? Because the rest of it, I was like, oh, okay, I can see that that's not real. But yeah, to your point, it did look really good in a lot of places. And yeah, so did the whole two heads on Danny. It looked pretty good most of the time. And I'm just like, okay, I can overlook when it looked bad, like when he is running and stuff. I'm like, all right. But yeah, they did a good job of trying to cover that up.
I know this comes up in a lot of movies and especially to some degree exploitation films, but the lab tour made me very uncomfortable. As even though we're seeing a two-headed rabbit or whatever, that's a rabbit actually experiencing those conditions you put them in. I don't like that actually. It just the raw nature of the film itself just highlighted the conditions for the actual creatures in there.
And with this sort of prosthetic head mounted on, it probably could not have been comfortable.
No.
Yeah.
When they show that fox, the first animal I think they show is the fox. I'm just like, oh, that poor thing.
Yeah.
I actually kept having flashes to Larry Fessenden's No Telling, which is very similar in a lot of ways. It involves transplants. It has the same love triangle with the mad scientist, the wife, and the good guy who's kind of trying to lure her out of this. There was a lot of parallels between those two movies.
We're going to take a break and we'll be back with more of this right after these brief messages.
Remember the stories that kept you awake at night.
I'm living in that closet, Dr. Fenner.
Can you still hear the screams?
I love having the children for dinner.
All from your television set.
In the night gallery.
A dark side.
Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast. Join hosts Father Malone, Mike White, and Chris Stashew as they exhume some of the most infamous horror television of all time. Midnight Viewing, from Weirding Way Media.
Until next time.
Get me a body. Please. A white bigot needed a new body. A black soul brother needed time to prove his innocence. Together, they unwittingly created one of the most horrifying aspects of modern medical science, the thing with two heads.
I told you guys I was innocent. I just need a little time. Why do you guys do this to me? Why did you do this to me?
Oh, my God. Ah! You crazy, you'll never get out of here.
That's what you think.
Hold it, everybody. Hold it right there. Will somebody do something?
A chase that crossed 4 counties and threatened the destruction of an entire town.
control of your body.
Doctor, help me, doctor! Help me! Help me!
One head, a convicted murderer. The other, a scientist guilty of only his bigotry and hate. And each trying desperately to gain full control of the black body they share. And Rosie Greer as
Help! Shut up.
the Thing with Two Heads.
That's right. And we're back and we're talking about the two-headed transplant. And I was very curious about the timeline between this and the Thing with Two Heads, because this one, Incredible Two-Headed Transplant, came out 1971. And it sounds like they were maybe making the second one right around this time, but there was a nice interview with James Gordon White that was on the Incredible Two-Headed Transplant disc. And he was saying that he got a little bit of money because of the Thing with Two Heads. And I think you even see his name listed in the credits. So I was glad that he did get a little bit from that, because these two movies, I mean, to have two-headed movies coming out, I mean, this is not like an Armageddon, Deep Impact kind of thing, but it's close. But it's the two-headedness of it all.
Yeah, I also noticed another name. I think it was John Lawrence and Jonathan Lawrence. I wasn't sure if that was the same person connected between the two of them, who's listed as, like, I think an executive producer on Thing with Two Heads. And are these are both AIP, right?
They are, yes.
So yeah, it's not like another company trying to rip off or kind of copy. They're just like, well, we did that. Maybe we can do it again differently.
What I like about the two films coming from the same house, basically, is that the two-headed transplant is kind of the movie's, the film's serious way of looking at it, quote unquote serious. But then you get the Thing with Two Heads and you're getting a takedown, a blaxploitation takedown of that movie, of another exploitation film. And it's so tongue-in-cheek, and I love it. I actually wished we had been doing the Thing with Two Heads because I loved it so much. And I had seen it for this, so it wasn't like I had known about the film ahead of time. But as a commentary about films like this, it was fantastic. Plus, it's not the Thing with Two Heads, according to the titles. It's the Thing with Two Heads.
That's true.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I forgot about that.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. Yeah, this is the one I had seen and remembered as a kid. So I was eager to see it again because it had been so long. And there was so much I missed as a kid. Because, as a kid, you're just like, all right, when are we going to get to either the gorilla with the two heads or the two-headed guy? So a lot of the first act leading up to it, how Ray Milland just seems to be like, oh, he's this crusty but intelligent doctor. Okay. And then once the reveal comes in, oh, yeah, I'm not hiring you because you're black. And you realize, oh, that's what this guy's about. Oof.
I had that momentary, what movie are we? Well, oh, that's the point.
Yeah.
Okay. I know what movie we're watching now. This is okay.
Yeah, that was surprising. And just how vicious he is about things. Because you're like, is he going to go there? Oh, he went there. Okay. All right.
And it's kind of funny to see, you have Bruce Dern starting off in kind of B movies, and Incredible Two-Headed Transplant is kind of the last of the really goofy B movies he did. And then you have Ray Milland on the opposite spectrum near the end of his career doing a B movie. But I gotta say, Milland doesn't really feel like he's phoning it in. He's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing. Nobody is giving half-ass performances in this one. It is all the way. And I really like Rosie Greer in here. But I really like Don Marshall as the black doctor who's being discriminated against. I thought he was great. Yeah.
He kind of feels like our side protagonist eventually, because he's the guy making the moral choices in the second half, and kind of he's the one we're sort of following through all this.
Right. Yeah. He's like Max if Max was good.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he could be the guy who helped save either Rosie Greer or Ray Milland. I mean, it's funny because this movie is very similar to one of my favorite films in the entire world, Free Jack, with this whole idea of, I need a different body. This one is dying. Give me a new body. And then this whole idea of like, oh, yeah, we've got a body for you, but it's a black guy. sorry, my bad, and I really like that little twist. I would say that I would like the thing with two heads a little bit more if they cut down on the moped stuff towards the end, because that just goes on forever. And talk about looking bad with the two heads. That's where it really shines for me.
Okay, it did go on way too long, but to be fair, it did that thing where it went on and it was funny, and then it stopped being funny because it went on too long, but then it kept going, so it was funny again. And it just kind of built on itself.
And when you see like Bud Ekins listing in the credits as a stunt coordinator, you're going to get some amazing motorcycle stuff. And some of those stunts are so good, you can tell it's like we had, 5 cameras on that crash? Use every bit of them. Oh, there's suddenly just another car following them that rolls down the hill the same way. I will say during that scene, though, Ray Milland's fake head started to look like Beetlejuice at some points. Yeah. Hair flying, pale, dark rings around the eyes. It was a little awkward.
Yeah, I really like this one, though. I think it's great, especially when the girlfriend comes back into it. And you've got the whole idea of, trying to prove Rosie's innocence. And I'm like, okay, all of these subplots actually really work for this.
And they wrap up. Everything is wrapped up. And the reveal at the end of the film, we're all in the car. We're singing about our freedom. Everything is fantastic. This white dead guy is off my head. I mean, I turned to Tim and I feel bad repeating this because it's, Jodorowsky, but this reveal is second to the reveal in The Holy Mountain for me. It was just perfect, and I can't say enough about that reveal.
Yeah, I won't spoil it for people because they definitely need to see it with their own eyes because, it is a glorious thing.
I really like Rosie Greer's performance. I love things about his character like that. He sees this as, okay, this will bide me time until they can prove my innocence. And then when it's revealed what they did, and he's like, I thought you were just going to take out some of my organs and give them to some kid. I didn't know you were going to do this. So even when he signed up for this, he's like, okay, maybe whatever horrible thing they're going to do might do some good for some poor kid. Didn't plan on this old white dude suddenly clomped onto his shoulder.
This one really shows that whole control thing because we don't get that as much in the Incredible Two-Headed Transplant, but you definitely do in this one with the whole left hand, right hand. And then when he punches Ray Milland in the face to knock him out. And then Ray Milland eventually punches him in the face and knocks him out. One of the funniest shots for me is just Rosie Greer punching himself in the face and knocking himself out.
For me, it's the shot right after where Rosie Greer is knocked out, and Rosie Greer, the actor, is like trying to pretend the Ray Milland head is in charge and walking this way so that head's upright. I thought that was really funny. And I gotta say it because he's like a childhood idol of mine, Rick Baker as the two-headed gorilla. I love all of those scenes. It sounds silly, but having seen him in a bunch of movies in creature suits, I see his eyes in a suit and I'm like, oh yeah, there's Rick Baker. You can tell.
As soon as that two-headed gorilla came on screen, I was like, I bet you anything that's Rick Baker. We talked on the Island of Dr. Moreau episode about the professional ape people, and Rick Baker for a long time, had he not made this massive career in special effects, I think he could have had a career just playing apes for the longest time.
I actually have Metamorphosis, his book she got for me for Christmas years ago, and there's a great chapter on this movie where he's talking about how he signed on basically with one gorilla head, I have a suit. And then once he gave him the money, he's like, shoot, I have to build a suit and a second head. But he did some really intelligent stuff in terms of making them interchangeable. So he could pop out of one head and actually be in the other one. And Doug Beswick, who helped him out and did the arm extensions, actually was either puppeteering their head. And in one scene, he actually snuck behind him and put his face, same way that Milland and Rosie Greer do it, in the other head. So you can see that they're actual operators in both of them. And it's really good.
That must have been the scene with the banana, because I was noticing during that when they're both eating bananas at the same time, I was like, that looks like two actual people in there.
In the wide shot, you can tell it's the puppet because the head's a little flat, but once it's the close-up, yeah. He also said they didn't have permits, so they would literally take him in a van at the end of this residential street, open the van, drive to the end, and have him just run at camera. And if people saw this two-headed gorilla running around, they were in the shot, that was it.
Yeah, it's definitely a step up, the two-headed gorilla versus the two-headed monkey.
Yeah.
Did you all get a chance to see Manster?
We did watch Manster. Did. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What'd you think of that one?
It's funny because, at least for me, when I was watching it, I kept thinking, if he didn't have two heads, you'd never know because there's nothing in the script that actually mentions two heads. it almost felt like it could have just been sort of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, or almost a Wolfman type story.
That's what I thought. I thought this was a converted Wolfman story, but
and
I think you'd mentioned, wasn't the title...
One of the alternate titles that was shot under was something about the beast with two heads or something like that. So, I mean, until he splits, it doesn't really come into play very much, though.
Not really, no. I mean, it is interesting because I know you guys didn't have a chance to see How to Get Ahead in Advertising, but that has pretty much the same idea of a head growing out of a person's shoulder. To your point, you don't get that nearly as much as you probably should in the Manster. You know, you'll see that better in like Army of Darkness. And I really think that the whole splitting of Ash into the evil Ash and the good Ash, I'm positive that Raimi must have seen this and said, let's do it like that, because of the whole pulling apart aspect. And like, that's really clever too, having them behind a tree as they're trying to pull themselves apart into basically the id and the super ego. Because really our main character in this movie, again, like Bruce Dern, not a good person at all. Just kind of a jerk all the time.
I get the implication that whatever this doctor injected into him kind of unleashes his primal side and kind of pushes him into jerkdom a little bit more. But that specific shot of the eye on his shoulder is, I definitely think Raimi saw that and was influenced by it. It's funny because just this weekend we saw The Manitou, and that movie, in terms of another thing coming out of somebody's shoulder that's this horrible malign influence, is kind of runs parallel with this one.
Doing my research, I found that there was an Andy Milligan film that was released in 1972. So right in the same sweet spot with our two previous movies. I know Manster comes out well before that, but that one is a Jekyll and Hyde. So it's called The Man with Two Heads, but it's because of a serum obtained from the brain of a mass murderer transforms the good Dr. Jekyll of London into the evil Mr. Blood.
Excuse me, my
The Man with Two Heads, a film of unspeakable horror.
Shut up, I said!
You say that you've experimented on animals. What does that prove? You haven't tried it out on a human. How do you know that a human won't react differently?
I don't. That's why I must have a human to try it on.
Maybe they could get rights for Dr. Jekyll, but not Mr. Hyde. I don't know what was going on there.
Every time we saw the creature in this movie, I could think of, I don't know if you remember this Modulok, that Masters of the Universe figure that had the multiple heads that kind of just pop onto the shoulders. Something about the way the heads are oriented here, that's all I could think of, because I used to have them as a kid and make all sorts of ghoulish sort of combinations of that guy.
This movie really reminded me of another one that we did called Horrors of a Malformed Man, and this whole idea of...
Yep.
Right? Yeah, especially the ex-wife, or I guess she's still legally married to the crazy doctor, but her in the cage and that makeup on her face, and it's really smart that this is all in black and white. That really helps with her makeup as well as the creature makeup later on. Yeah, I was like, oh, we're really getting into some great, Euro-Goro type of stuff here with the way that these creatures are portrayed. And I like, to your point from earlier, as far as like, I didn't know that he was growing a second head. Yeah, because so much of it is focused on his hand and that kind of like creepy, Frederick March turning into Mr. Hyde hand effect that they have.
And some of the performances, I actually kind of liked Tetsu Nakamura as our mad scientist in this one, Robert Suzuki. He's just like, he's almost kind of genial about it, just like, oh, this is going to be interesting and exciting. And it doesn't really fit with the mad scientist thing, but at least it's doing something a little bit more than Bruce Dern did.
Yeah, I like this way more than I thought I would. I was really impressed by this one. And the copy that I saw looked horrible, but I know there is a Blu-ray out there. And I kept thinking, oh, well, I need to find the original Japanese version. There is no original Japanese version. They shot it in English, and it's all American not American actors, but American folks behind the scenes kind of thing as far as the directors and writers, which was very surprising to me. I thought, oh, well, they took this Japanese movie, added in a white guy, and then just repackaged it like, Godzilla or some of those other earlier Japanese films.
As the movie went on and I started to realize, like, especially, what's his name, Jerry Ito, who played the police superintendent, I really liked his performance and realizing...
Oh, he was great.
Oh, he's not dubbed. No, he's speaking in English. So this was actually shot this way. The one performance I thought was really out there was Jane Hilton as Linda, the wife. Every time she shows up, she seems vaguely psychotic when she's trying to talk to her husband.
And again, I don't know if it was a transfer or not, but she looked really sweaty to me a lot. Okay, good. I'm glad it wasn't just me.
She just, it didn't look like she was made up very well. She was not lit very well, although I do like a lot of the lighting has a very film noir quality to a lot of this. I also couldn't help but wonder if the main character being named Larry was a little subtle reference to Larry Talbot, because there's a lot of Wolfman kind of qualities to this story, too.
Yeah, when he's out, and it almost looks like he's on the moors towards the end there, when he's running around away from the, the people, again, hunting him kind of thing, and he's just like struggling with himself and all that, and trying to get the pressure, trying to break free of this other creature. I kept trying to think of other movies and TV shows where you get that split of like the good and the evil sides of people. And the only one, well, Rick and Morty came up in my mind because I'm sure that that's happened. I'm pretty sure with like Jerry turning into a worm, and I can't remember the wife's name, turning into like this massive creature. And that was like her internal therapy, and him being the worm was his therapy. But I just kept thinking of Star Trek and the way that the transporter split. I believe it was Kirk into good Kirk and well, evil Kirk and less evil Kirk.
It doesn't probably count, but I was thinking that Tales from the Crypt episode with Don Rickles as a ventriloquist that has the conjoined twin that he finally gets off of his arm.
There's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Zeppo, where Xander gets split into two.
Yep, that's a good one too, yeah. I feel like there's another one, but I can't think of. I can think of a lot of possession ones like Poltergeist 2, where he gets the possessed tequila worm out and then it grows into this whole disgusting creature, which I think was a Giger design. It's a great looking monster in that scene. Ugh.
Yeah, sure is. Especially that close up of the face that's like molded to look like the old priest. Ooh. But yeah, I would recommend that you definitely check out How to Get Ahead in Advertising. That was 1989, a Bruce Robinson one with Richard E. Grant, and that was the first movie I ever saw in a foreign country. So it has a lot of meaning for me. I was on I don't know what you would call it, I guess student exchange, even though I wasn't really a student back when I was in my teens, and went to see that in London. And it was the first time I ever had assigned seating in a theater, and first time I ever saw a commercial before a movie.
Oh, wow.
How unusual is that?
That's so weird.
So strange, yeah. Both assigned seatings and commercials before films?
Never heard
That's
of it.
crazy. But it is so good, and Richard E. Grant is just amazing. Bruce Robinson's given him some monologues that are just killer. All the chemicals and because he's the worst. Like, this advertising executive is just the absolute worst person that you can imagine. And so when the boil comes out, it's like, all right, what is the boil going to be versus this other guy, because he's already the worst person in the world. And yeah, Richard E. Grant speaking to his boil is fantastic stuff.
The only other two-headed one I was thinking of, and it kind of came up every time we'd see some of the dodgier effects of the fake heads thing, is Zaphod Beeblebrox from the original Hitchhiker's Guide, where they come up with a conceit that his other head is usually asleep, so they don't actually have to puppeteer it most of the time in the show. But I've always kind of loved that oh, what's going on? No, go back to sleep. It's fine.
It's been so long since I've seen that BBC version, as opposed to that just horrific movie version, which I still I wish that had been better.
Me too. I do love the BBC version, though. I grew up on that.
Yeah, those are some of those weird effects, too, where it's like the video in the studio, film outside stuff. And that used to throw me a lot when I was watching the old Tom Baker Doctor Who. I'd be like, what? Before I knew what film stocks were or what video was, I'd just be like, something's so off here.
Or for me, learning years later that the dish of the day is actually Peter Davison, the fifth Doctor Who.
I don't know that at all.
Meet the Meat, are you talking about? Yeah.
The dish of the day, yeah. I recommend you eat my liver. It should be very tender by now. Yeah, under that horrific makeup is Peter Davison.
We had the Simpsons Halloween episode.
Oh, yeah, that's true. They actually did 2 Treehouse of Horror. Well, like one little reference at the end where Burns' head is stuck on Homer's body, I remember. And there was, I believe, one with Bart and Lisa ending up kind of with their heads together. But I can't quite remember. It's been so long since I've seen that one.
Those are good to go back and rewatch, because I'm trying to remember which one I just saw recently. I had to go back and check it out because I was just like, oh, we were talking about the butterfly effect. And I was pulling the Grandpa Simpson line about if you ever time travel, never kill anything, especially a bug.
Oh, yeah. It was Treehouse of Horror 24 is the one that did the Bart Lisa conjoined one.
I can really see, I mean, the Homer, Mr. Burns, is almost Rosie Greer and Raymond.
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
Or maybe even the Danny and Cass thing.
I'm almost surprised we haven't got a resurgence that somebody hasn't tried to do a goofy two-headed transplant movie again, just as an homage. It feels like we're due.
Oh, yeah. Well, now with the effects that they are, I mean, that's got to be super easy. Well, probably not super easy, but the idea of having a thing on your shoulder to give you that, like the shadows and everything correctly, and then being able to just map somebody's face onto that, that it seems like it would be pretty simple these days.
Or having an actor in like a green screen suit that you can just wipe out the rest of the body and just have the head there. Yeah.
And just like have him shake around a lot while he's running.
We were thinking during Thing with Two Heads that, you could do this as sort of a buddy cop movie, or it's like a buddy adventure movie where the two of them have to overcome their differences.
Two heads are better than one.
Yes.
Yep. You could call it Head to Head.
It could have been Michael J. Fox and James Woods all those years ago.
Oh, what, the hard way?
The hard way, yes. Make it even harder.
But that's the two-headed snakes.
See, that could have been like Beverly Hills Cop 4 if they thought of it early. Just have all three of them together, Taggart and Billy and Axel Foley, one body.
Exactly. Because that really would be the sequel, like if they did the incredible three-headed transplant. Danny comes out of the wreckage. Bruce Dern is still around.
Oh, the other thing I kept thinking of was The Office, where it was Michael Scott's Halloween costume with the fake head there. It kind of made me want to do that.
Well, there you go. Your next idea. All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
It looked harmless enough. Just a professional model's album of poses. Yet this was the glamorous pitfall, where there lurked the most seductive forces of evil. Violent jealousy.
Johnny, I like that girl.
I don't care what you like or what you don't like.
The torments of unfaithfulness.
I met her a couple of months ago while I was on a case.
What about this girl?
Somebody told him a lot of things about her and me.
Were they true?
Yes.
Venomous hate. The raging fury of a guilty conscience.
You better call the police. I just killed a man.
That's right. We will be back next week with the first film of Noirvember, Pitfall. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Tim and Agatha. So what is the latest with you two?
I'll admit things have been a little slow recently. We've had a lot of kind of family issues to get through, but we're starting to gear back up into recording again. We have a few episodes we've recorded and are working on editing and hopefully going to get into a more regular rhythm pretty soon.
Yeah, it's going to be a full podcast season for us next year. We're going to get back into our form, probably doing 20 episodes. So we're going to be back and out there.
I am looking forward to, though, for every November we do a Bond movie, and we're going to be doing The Spy Who Loved Me. And last time we actually found a James Bond movie that she liked.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking The Man with the Golden Gun turned out to be the winner. So I'm thinking she's going to like the next one, too, because it's goofy and a lot of fun. So
it is very goofy, yes. And Scaramanga is pretty great, though the return of Clifton James really left a lot for me to be desired, especially his racism.
Don't get me started.
And by the time this episode comes out, it will be right around Halloween, and I know you guys really like to celebrate, especially there in Salem.
Oh, yes. It's our anniversary as well, so we pretend the city celebrates for us every year. Mm-hmm. And everybody already seems to be in Salem, so the tourist crowds are heavy.
Yep. we're going to go do our zombie walk pretty soon, where we're going to be zombified, interesting zombified costumes this year. I'm going to be a zombified Blockbuster employee because Blockbuster may be dead, but it still lives on.
Get the blue and the khaki out and that great name tag. Yeah.
I haven't worn them in like 25 years. It feels really weird.
I'm going to be a zombie tourist because that's how I exercise my anger.
And it's also the scariest thing you can encounter in Salem is tourists.
That's true. I'm just going to go that one step further.
One other thing I got to mention that's kind of amazing. One of our favorite theaters, Coolidge Corner in Boston, is actually doing a whole sort of William Castle gimmick retrospective, and they're doing the gimmicks. They're doing House on Haunted Hill with Emerjo, which we're going to go see. They're doing The Tingler in Percepto, which I have to get tickets for because I've always wanted to see exactly how that plays out.
But you forgot to mention the marathon subject. They do a horror movie marathon, and it's 12 hours horror films. This year, it's Mad Scientists. So we might end up seeing one of these movies again.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a distinct
possibility. A lot of madness.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Or sedateness instead of madness. When it comes to Bruce Dern.
I think I'll stick this head on this body. Yeah. Maybe if he put another extra head on his wife, he would have been more interested in her then.
He could put Max's head on her body.
Oh.
He could have had it all.
There you go. Thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They're all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
The jeans was black behind a microscope.
kid's got one chance, but it's a risky try.